and welcome to our conversation about the nature of distractedness and restlessness. We hope you've had a chance to observe our presentation on what we call the default state of our mind, that is, a state of distractedness and confusion that we often find ourselves in. So, Dr. Jane?
Yeah, Mark, I enjoy this conversation about distractedness because so many of us are distracted all the time, yet we may not know it. We're distracted by the cell phone, we're distracted by a knock on the door. But is that all distractedness is about, or is there something more?
Well, that's probably the more manifest versions of distractedness, the kinds of distractedness that we can see in an external sort of way. But genuinely, the forms of distractedness that most concern us are those that come from within our minds. Distractedness is nothing new. Cell phones are new.
Yeah.
Technology is a new kind of distractedness, we might say. But human beings, from almost the very time we've begun to live together, have been concerned with distractions and confusion. There's stories about where the Buddha had to leave the monastery for a while because it just got too noisy and there were too many distractions, and so he went off into the woods to be alone. So this idea of seeking solitude, seeking refuge from distractedness is nothing new. What we have, however, are all these forms of technology that make it appear as if what's happening to us is that we are in a state of confusion caused by these external stimuli.
So, as I see it, there is an external distraction, which are quite obvious, but there is also an internal distraction.
Exactly right.
That our thoughts are sort of intervening in our present state of being.
I think part of it is the way that our minds are constantly churning and judging, and we are seeking refuge from that cacophony of dialogue that goes on in our head. Now, I don't know about how you experience your mind, but for me, it's like a rolling film. There's a constant conversation among many different voices talking about things as they happen. Sometimes I just want to get away from that.
Sure. So even as we're sitting down right now, one of the things that is distracting me is I have a patient who has cancer. She got admitted to the hospital today, and she's developed pneumonia. She is critically ill. And I'm wondering if she has gotten her antibiotics on time. I'm wondering if her kidney function is doing okay. Those are sort of distractions which are running in back of my mind, and they prevent me from being in the moment, in the present.
Well, that's precisely exactly what I'm talking about here, about how this internal dialogue that we have, and the dialogue can often be about very profound and important things, but it's constantly running, and it's almost impossible to turn it off. So it might be helpful if you could, for the moment, not think about your patient, and yet return to her concerns at a more appropriate time.
Right.
But we find that without a disciplined mind, it's very difficult to do.
Right.
And so consequently, we become obsessed very easily with ideas. And that there's nothing wrong with rehearsing these ideas unless they become debilitating and take our energy away from the things that we really need to focus on.
You're talking about taking energy away. There was a recent New York Times article which talked about the energy, our mental energy, our physical energy that is depleted when we are distracted.
Yeah.
And in ways, distraction is also dangerous, right? You look at air traffic controllers. If they are distracted, dangerous things can happen. Yeah. And even as doctors, we know that if there are distractions to someone who's managing a difficult patient, we miss out on things.
Yeah, and I would even say those two things are related. This idea that distractedness takes mental energy, which depletes us of our physical energy and makes us tired. And that tiredness, in turn, makes it very difficult for us to focus, to concentrate, and do our jobs properly.
But is this our default state? Are we programmed as humans to be distracted?
Well, it's an interesting metaphor that you use. And I think it's a good one, actually, because, yes, I would say we are programmed to be distracted. but I wouldn't say it's the way we have to be. In other words, I don't think we're born distracted, but our culture habituates us to the state of distractedness so that it becomes very easy for us to turn to our cell phones, to watch TV, to get involved in the things that take us away from our ability to concentrate. So rather than think of it as being a natural state, I prefer to think of distraction as a habitual state.
Right, right.
So we have the habit of being distracted.
But when distraction goes to an extreme, it can turn into suffering in ways.
Oh, absolutely.
And talk about a little bit on that. Is how do you see the landscape of distractedness and how it is different from a wandering mind? Yeah. How is it different from a curious mind? I put some of these ideas together.
Those are some very important distinctions that you make. And perhaps we ought to say that there are different degrees of distractedness. Sometimes distractedness is not a bad thing. It only becomes difficult. It only causes us real pain, I think, when we're unable to focus upon our task at hand. So let's say I want to have an engaged conversation with you, but my concerns about my finances, for instance, are drawing me away, and I can't keep concentrated and be present to you. At that moment, I think my distractedness has become debilitating. But on the other hand, it's an average thing that happens. It's a habitual thing that happens. So you might have this thought about your patient that you're worried about, and you can simply note that to yourself. Well, I'm being distracted. I'm thinking about something. And then because of the practice of mindfulness and meditation, we're able to acknowledge that and then return our attention or our concentration. So the distraction doesn't necessarily have to be a debilitating one.
So I really like the way you've sort of landscaped that, is that there's a natural way or natural way of being, and in that there are different degrees of distractions.
Yeah.
And when that distraction becomes overwhelming, and in medicine, we talk about when a condition is so overwhelming that it interferes with your day-to-day life, such as an obsessive-compulsive disorder, then it becomes pathologic.
Yeah.
And so what we're really talking about is mindfulness can help us in a state where it is before it becomes pathologic. When it becomes annoying or it becomes distracting enough, if I may use the term, that it doesn't let us function well or function efficiently.
Yeah, that's an excellent distinction. I would say that most of us are most of the time distracted and restless, and there's not much that we can do about it, and we would really be miserable most of our lives if that's the way it were all the time. The good news is, because this is a habitual state, because we, in a way, feed our distractedness, we can also counter-effect the habits of being distracted. So just as I have developed the habits of thinking about things and allowing my mind to go in different directions, by practicing a concentration exercise, I can learn now to develop the habit of non-distractedness, of focused attention, as we'll talk about later on in the presentation.
Good. Well, this has been an excellent conversation, and it really sets us up for our next conversation, which is about mindfulness.